as you increase solar generation, and we're seeing this very widely across the major solar markets, then you have oversupply in the middle of the day. That leads to a collapse in prices, so-called cannibalization. And that's absolutely undermining the long-term prospects of solar. So we have a market where we have a huge build out, but real negative feedback and a kind of existential threat to the economics of solar in the medium term. And what our feedback from developers and end users are that they want a solution which increases their volume but decreases their exposure to that peak solar generation time in the middle of the day. And that's exactly what we do.
Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast, where we dive into real conversations with business owners, innovators, and industry leaders reshaping the future of clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sectors. I'm Kreel Hutchinson, your host. Our guest today is Joe Fleming, the co-founder at Cori Energy, based in the UK. We'll be discussing his innovative solar tracking technology that's set to revolutionize renewable energy in higher latitudes, addressing a critical market gap and boosting efficiency by up by 30%. If you're a renewable energy professional, climate tech founder, or investor in sustainable innovation, you're going to love this show because we dive deep into bringing a disruptive, patented solar technology to market and the strategic challenges and opportunities that come with scaling a climate tech startup. It's an example of how deep technological expertise combined with strategic market entry can unlock massive growth in the green economy. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thank you very much, Kreel. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was very excited about this conversation because of the market impact that this technology offers. Before we dive deep into the big solution that you're providing for people who are interested in solar where it doesn't, it's not sunny all the time and you're in higher latitudes. Before we get into all of that, I would like you to explain who you are, what your background is, how was Cori Energy created? Please share that with our audience.
No problem. Well, as I say, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My background, I'm a Scot. I grew up with an interest in the natural world, and when I went to look at options for university, the thing that struck me, most exciting thing really, that came to my attention at that age was looking at earth sciences. So I became a geologist as an undergraduate at Oxford, and then I went on to do a PhD in petroleum geophysics. And in many ways, it's quite an interesting reflection of the change of the energy landscape, that the time I was graduating, the North Sea was at its peak and hiring hundreds and hundreds of earth scientists and engineers. But even then, I could see, looking back to the post-1873 crisis, I'd read quite a lot about that, and I was really interested in alternative solutions. So after working for 5 years, I moved into electricity after my MBA as the renewable regulations took off across Europe in 2001. And that's where I started off in biomass and then worked in onshore wind and moved into solar. And that's what brought us, myself and my now directors, we'd already worked in the wind company and sold that on. And Cori was created to develop a better solar solution.
Well, that's incredible. I love hearing people's backgrounds because it gives me a real indication of the experience level. So obviously you've been in this industry for a while, been an enthusiast for a long time, but been in the industry at different aspects. You had mentioned wind, solar, being electrification, probably a different aspect. So what brought you fully here into the solar world? What grabbed your attention as being the place you wanted to really plant your flag in Cori and move in this direction?
Well, in a way, it was really simple. It was a single conversation with my colleague, Tony Duffin, and it's as simple as solar tracking, that is turning a solar panel to face the sun. It's the single most important component for increasing solar efficiency. And it's really simple. It's like a sunflower which follows the sun through the day, or alternatively, it's intuitive if you go outside on a cold day and you're cold and want to warm up, you automatically turn your face towards the sun and you feel the additional energy. It's as simple as that. It's a simple idea. The challenge is doing it cost effectively in a way that's reliable. Asked my colleague Tony why this didn't happen as a technology. It wasn't deployed at higher latitudes across Europe and the US. And Tony's response is too expensive. So we back solved the economic problem by running our solar model backwards and said, okay, that's our target cost. For we can work out if we know a given improvement in yield and a given yield in terms of the amount of sunlight falling in any location, we can come up with a break-even cost for the capex, making some assumptions about opex. And my lovely colleague Tony said, well, that is great. I'm going to solve that problem. And that's how we came about with a series of different prototypes over multiple years, and that led to the patent application.
Fantastic. How long have you guys been doing and been at this now?
So from memory, the patent application went in at the end of 2018. It took 5 years to do the European patents. That was COVID that killed the timing of that. But actually, our US and Canadian patents are ongoing. They start at the same time. They're almost through, but they're yet to be concluded.
Joe, I'm curious because this seems like such an obvious technology to introduce into the industry, and I was kind of surprised when it hadn't existed. Is there other competition in the marketplace? Is there other companies that are striving towards this type of technology when it comes to solar?
Yeah, I mean, the background to this is that there was an alternative technology called dual axis or full axis tracking, which essentially, if you think of a radar dish, it's a long pole, and you put your solar panels on the top of that long pole, and it can point anywhere in the sky. That technology was reasonably successful through the early parts of the 2010s, but essentially it didn't make it out of a subsidy world. It required very expensive panels, and therefore the balance of plant, the balance of system cost to be insignificant. And the solutions which did exist, and Dager was a big German player who sold 100,000 of these or so, you can see that they really stopped selling them by about 20. So what there hasn't been is a follow-up to try and change the solution to that operates in a subsidy-free world, which is more driven by price, but also reliability, because the solution that did exist was effective at maximizing your generation, but the reality was in practice it had terrible reliability because the forces on the load panels move through the moving components, and when the moving components failed, everything failed, and it was a real challenge to get them back online. And for commercial customers that need reliability, that's crucial. So it was their cost and their operational track record that killed them.
So it sounds like you guys have then taken those experiences and really cracked the code on a viable, working, reliable product that increase in efficiency moving forward. Now, how has the feedback been from the marketplace?
It's great. I mean, this kind of standout kind of feedback from large scale solar developers is that what they're looking at is a market where in the near term they have guaranteed PPAs, purchase agreements backed by government contracts. But beyond that, there's a cliff. And many of your listeners, viewers will be familiar with the fact that as you increase solar generation, and we're seeing this very widely across the major solar markets, then you have oversupply in the middle of the day. That leads to a collapse in prices, so-called cannibalization. And that's absolutely undermining the long-term prospects of solar. So we have a market where we have a huge build out, but real negative feedback and a kind of existential threat to the economics of solar in the medium term. And what our feedback from developers and end users are that they want a solution which increases their volume, but decreases their exposure to that peak solar generation time in the middle of the day. And that's exactly what we do. Our generation is principally earlier in the morning and later in the day. So we extend the daily generation curve, and we also extend it seasonally. So we generate similarly more in particularly spring and autumn. So it's reducing the price exposure to the market, and that's a kind of key feature as well as the volume.
Yeah, great. Thank you for explaining that. So tell me a little bit more about Cori Energy. Well, what's the size of your team? Where are you currently at in taking this to the marketplace and rollout?
So Cori's a classic modern company. We're distributed. We don't have a single office, but we have kind of PhDs and MScs and engineers distributed across the UK and one or two in Spain. And we are having deployed these for 5 years in the field with Department of Energy funding. Our next stage is really to kind of build that market and enter that market more seriously. So we've got a minimum viable product that's been operating since 2021. Stage is to take that to kind of full scale production.
Fantastic. So, what is your plan to get to full scale production? Are you having investor conversations? Are you looking for capital, raising money, deploying potential pilots? What does that rollout look like?
Well, so the hierarchy is that we need to demonstrate that customer traction, and on that build our investment confidence, and from there build our manufacturing capacity. So on our market and customer traction, we've concentrated during the trial phases with the larger scale potential end users. So we've worked with players like Thames Waters and large utilities to deploy these in a commercial setting to test this for the large scale, which is where the main bulk of it is. But in terms of the market entry, obviously, as a hardware product, our unit prices at low volumes are going to be high. So we've got a two-part step into the market. Step one is to go to the residential market where we can have a higher price and cover the higher unit costs at small volume. And with that, build our operational track record, meet the higher technical standards of the commercial market. And from there, that's where the real investor and market inflection point is, where we can start serving the small scale solar farms with hundreds of units at a time.
Great. Makes sense. What are some of the major challenges you're seeing in that rollout? Where are some of the friction points on really communicating the value proposition and getting buy-in from the marketplace?
So I think the most simple challenge is that we have smart homes, we have smart grids, we have smart everything, but we've got dumb solar. But nobody recognizes that. They only know what they know. So when we come to an end user or a developer installer, only some of them are well enough informed to have a long enough memory to know what this alternative is for tracking. So if people don't know about it, they're not going to ask for it. So point one is that a challenge to the market is market awareness, education. That's point one. In terms of the kind of next challenge, it follows therefore that particularly for the commercial and industrial markets, we've said that operational reliability is core, and it's absolutely fundamental to our design. So every point we've looked at critical and fault analysis, we've broken down all our components with accelerated testing, but ultimately you have to see it operating in the field. So building that operational track record is crucial to getting the credibility, the technical credibility in the larger scale market. And the reason for that is that ultimately almost no one owns renewable energy projects apart from funders, apart from banks. They're very risk averse to new technology. And so you have this tension between developers who maybe 1/3 or 1/4 are interested in new tech, but they've got to find ways of deploying it in a way that is equity owned, and they don't run up against the debt challenges in terms of the bankability challenge. And that's what for us is what the kind of inflection point is in the market, meeting that bankability threshold. And that's what our technical and operational work is focused towards.
You raised some really valuable points there, and I think many of our audience members will relate to it because they're in some phase of growing out their own business. It's kind of, the chicken or the egg scenario being like, well, they want us to prove it, but we need capital in order to move forward so that we can prove it at the scale. So it's a slow dance trying to get to this viable flexion point, which is the springboard to something greater. You had mentioned in there just the need for an education, because unless people know about it and understand it, then the value can't really exist for them. So what are
Yeah.
some of the ways that you and your team get out into the marketplace and educate people on your technology? Have you been kind of keeping that under wraps as these patents come through, or is now the big like coming out party? What does that look like in regards to like advertising and marketing your value proposition?
Yeah. Well, a bit of both. Have during the development process and the patent process, we're cautious about this. Inevitably, there's always, the challenge of, is there a Chinese product that's going to appear tomorrow? But putting that aside, there's a lovely Scottish expression which says, at some point, you've got to lift your kilt. And the point about that is that, we have to reveal ourselves at one point. And in our case, that is about 2026, taking that to the market. And our approach there is as much about the product as the system. So one of the key things for us is that we say we increase your volume, your value, and the availability. So we increase the amount of generation for a grid constraint. We increase the value because it's at higher times of higher prices when demand is high and therefore electricity price is high. And because we've got a flatter generation process, we meet more on-site demand. We can match more on-site demand. But those are just like the intrinsic benefits. Actually, we feel that we need to articulate the extrinsic benefits, which are that if you've got a flatter generation profile, if you're recycling, if you've got more solar, then you can recycle more solar in your battery system. And a core part of your levelized cost of storage, there's two parts. So one is your capital cost, but other one is about how much you cycle your low cost solar electricity. So that's one part of it, to articulate part of that system. But equally, with heat pumps on a domestic setting, we have a situation where solar is out of phase with heat demand. And the more we can talk about the seasonal benefits, not necessarily in the deep of the winter, but in the spring and the autumn when there is a 50% of heat demand, we're generating more and we can offset the demand. So we're trying to link it to the bigger picture of the fact that there's electrification going on at great pace, whether it's batteries, EVs, heat pumps. Consumers want more electricity, but they want it at a better time of day and kind of season. And we're linking it to that bigger demand story.
Fantastic. So as your kind of lean team has developed and grown this out, you're now taking it to the market, really sharing the story in 2026. We also have simultaneously this huge trend of AI, being implemented at scale really over the last 18 months. I'm curious, what does the AI trend and implementation look like both on the Cori product and technical side and also on maybe the administrative and internal workflow side?
Good question. I think we're all challenged by this, aren't we? So on the technical design, you could say we were a few years too early. So we had several PhD mathematicians employed for several years solving the nuance of how to optimize tracker generation, but also the shading aspect of that. In some ways, my colleagues have told me that really just in 2026, AI has got to a point where it can start solving that problem. So we're conscious that our software potentially doesn't have uh, the same barrier around it, the same moat around it. But actually, with any tool, the problem is crap in and crap out. You have to understand your problem. So for us, it's about understanding the problem, having the data to train your models. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years, because the academic sources for trackers are very few and far between. They're basically the historical data doing for a lot of the yield assessment is in California and Spain. And collecting high latitude data, that's an kind of important part of what we're doing. So one part is like using AI to advance that and speed that process up. But in many ways, we've solved the problem we've needed for there. Operationally, internally, we're at a stage where when we talked previously in our introduction, we talked about the fact that in a startup, you need different skills every 6 months. You need technical skills, then you need more commercial skills, then you need investment skills, and you need marketing skills, and those change. And I think for us, it's more about, in that sense, it's about the collaboration and the online tools. So I was at a webinar this morning just talking about the need to show revenue per head growing. AI is driving people to be leaner and use kind of more fractional and limited resources. So that's the way we're working to try and minimize our staffing as we grow.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're in a very strategic location right now as you take it to the marketplace that you don't have the baggage of being a really huge company that's already established and maybe a little slower to be resilient or also slower to make strategic changes in your strategy. So you're in a good position. And it also seems like in a way, even though this concept has been around for a while, you're really in a first mover's position bringing this out. Let me ask you, what would be one of the biggest bottlenecks you'd love to solve maybe in the project or in the industry that would really allow you to advance here?
Question. Well, I think the two I would immediately kind of think of is, as I say, is kind of going back to that marketplace awareness. That's a very slow process. We've got to educate companies, end users, and installers at the same time. So for us, that, as we're all aware, winning the war of the eyeballs is a continual challenge. So one part of that is just how to speed that awareness program up, and we're really interested in working with partners on that. Another part of this is that we are working in the supply chain to try and find a way to manufacture this, if possible, in the UK and Europe to drive value for the UK in the manufacturing supply chain. And that's a surprisingly difficult challenge. I sit on the Solar Energy UK supply chain group. There's a lot of interest from government, from GB Energy to try and drive that. But ultimately, it's quite a narrow window for manufacturing of hardware projects because there's a point where you've got to ask up how far you can grow without cheaper steel and cheaper overseas labor. So for us, we've got this a bottleneck in a sense of a narrow throat to get through is how to credibly build a UK-based company in the near term before we're at scale. And strategically, we'll take no doubt we would expect to leave our options open and review that every kind of 2 to 3 years. But in the near term, it's about finding those value partnerships in the supply chain with people who can really manufacture on a world-class basis and do that as cost-effectively as possible.
Great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, what have you tried so far that has worked and what have you tried so far that has not produced results in achieving those partnerships required?
Great. So on the partnership side, our initial conversations have been with companies who are already making solar mounts. So essentially it's a product line extension for them. They're already making mountings or the steel frames for the solar panels and working with them to kind of look at that design and consider what the market is. There's two different conversations going on there. Also been taking a kind of from a bottom-up approach, trying to talk to some of the old, what we would call in the UK, kind of West Midlands, the old west of Birmingham manufacturing, where I was talking to a manufacturer today, and he was saying, 90% of our equipment and our units are over 100 years old. We were based here because we had cheap coal, we had cheap water, and we don't necessarily have it now. So we've been looking at those manufacturing partnerships and fabrication partnerships and looking to think about how we can really upgrade them to modern manufacturing techniques, because you have to compete with the fact that you've got higher costs of labor and raw materials. But that said, there is many different layers of it. There are definitely users who want UK supply chain. There is, I'm not sure how familiar people are with the current regulations that are coming in from the carbon border mechanism in the EU, which puts a price on products being imported with the idea that you pay for the differential cost of having a kind of higher environmental footprint. In principle, if you're importing steel made from China using a coal plant, then you pay a higher carbon cost on that product. But that's regulations that have just come in. They're very much up in the air, people interpreting them. But it's another one of the regulatory barriers which goes around, wraps around your conversations about your kind of strategic partnerships.
Looking ahead then, what are the key milestones Cori Energy needs to hit, let's say in the next 12 to 18 months to successfully scale and in regards to growth?
Great. Well, in a way, that's quite straightforward. So we have a market entry strategy into the residential market. That gives us a higher price, which means we've got the gross margin we need in the near term. Our targets there are around engaging with installers, educating end users, and opening up which is about 20% of the UK domestic market, really driving that down to the end users who are investing in electrification at the moment. So we need to drive that market pool. The second point is about investment. Everybody at our stage needs investment on a continuous basis. So it's about finding that investment for this initial stage before we get to the inflection point. So our narrative is about demonstrating that the basis of that bankability over our next investment cycle, and that brings us to an value inflection point in about at the end of a kind of 24-month runway. But where possible, if I've got partnerships or non-dilutive funding or grants or risk debt, I'll use that before equity if I possibly can, because equity is an expensive way of getting finance.
Great.
Sorry, I was just going to say that the final point is about the wrapping up the whole supply chain delivery.
Joe, I've really been enjoyed this conversation because this technology seems like really a no-brainer, right? If we're going to go with solar, why not make it as efficient as possible so that everything is more effective? The end user is going to have cheaper energy. The asset owners will be happier because it's a better investment. So I think you're very well positioned, and I hope you guys great success in 2026 and 27 as you roll this out and really take it to scale. For people who would like to follow your work, maybe potentially even set up a conversation to talk about strategic partnerships, for example, how do people get a hold of you and follow you?
Well, in terms of our approaching us, the two easy things are our website, which are corienergy.com. So that's two E's in the middle, corienergy.com. And the other thing is following me as Joe or Jonathan Fleming on LinkedIn. And those are our main routes.
Fantastic. To our audience, I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes of the podcast so you can grab them easily there. If you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and share this forward with somebody that you may know who's operating in the UK solar market and potentially in other higher latitudes, like our friends in, Canada and beyond. Joe, before we sign off here, I want to pass it over to you. Any final thoughts on where you and the industry are headed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big question moving forward is, there is discussion about peak solar. Chinese solar deployment is going to be down this year. Are we beyond it? But I think that kind of misses the point, which is that we are still a long way off the kind of energy system we need to deploy to be low carbon. So this is although there are short-term targets that people see, it's absolutely clear that this is a very long road. And I think part of that will be a migration from large-scale solar farms, which are kind of a key part of it, but are always behind the grid constraints, to increasing amount of behind-the-meter deployment. And we hope to ride that wave.
Hey, I love that vision. I hope you great success with it. Joe, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing the value proposition for Cori Energy. I want to thank the audience for being here. Like, subscribe, share it forward. And this wraps up another episode of Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast. Take care.